Ambassador Daniel Stein leaned back with the posture of a man on vacation rather than a representative of a rising species. His hair, dark with flecks of silver, curled neatly at his temples. A porcelain mug of coffee steamed in his hand, incongruously homey among the chalices, nutrient packs, and dripping sensory straws of the other delegates. His face bore a faint smile, the kind one might wear at a neighbor's barbecue, casual, almost bored. Only those who had looked closely into his eyes might have noticed the way calculation lived there, patient and unblinking. Few ever did. Beside him sat the aide, a boy barely into his teens, pale-faced and jittery, but eager in his ill-fitted council tunic. Nephew, technically, though Stein introduced him to the aliens as a page because aliens responded better to roles than relationships. The boy's wide-eyed curiosity amused some of the delegates. Others muttered about the impropriety of bringing offspring into chambers meant for hardened negotiators. Stein let them mutter. He always let them mutter. The council session had been plodding along with its usual mix of pomp and triviality. A three-armed species from the Orion Spur argued over tax exemptions for gravity wells. A reptilian matriarchist about territorial incursions no one else could even see on star maps. A feathered collective debated grain tariffs, while half the room dozed. Stein sipped his coffee. When the noise reached a pitch that blurred into nonsense, he pulled from his satchel a small, dog-eared notepad. He began scribbling with a mechanical pencil. Not policy, not notes. Doodles, abstract swirls, arrows, tiny cartoons of creatures with big eyes and bigger teeth. He did this openly. Let them think him distracted, harmless, quaint. At the center throne sat the Galactic King of the Vair Dominion, a being larger than life, robed in iridescent scales that shimmered through shades of green and violet. His crown was fuse bone, his jaw lined with cruel tusks, and his eyes burned with the predatory satisfaction of centuries unchallenged. He had dismissed humanity from the moment Earth claimed its seat, calling them soft-world apes, tolerated only because the charter demanded inclusivity. He despised their smiles. The debate turned, as debates often did, to resource allocations. The king rose, his voice a booming thunder that made lesser species bow instinctively. He demanded tribute in mineral rights, ships, and, most pointedly, the labor of conquered worlds. As he spoke, his gaze drifted like a hunting beast across the hall, daring anyone to defy him. When his eyes fell on the human delegation, his lip curled. "You," he snarled, tusks gleaming. "The mammals who hide behind treaties. Always drinking your bitter brown water. Always scratching on your little pads like hatchlings. Why are you here if you cannot offer strength? What are you if not parasites on stronger backs?" Stein smiled as though complimented. He set his coffee mug on the table with care, letting the soft clink echo across the silence. "We're still learning the ropes, Your Majesty. I imagine our contribution will become clear in time." The chamber chuckled, some nervously, some cruelly. The king's nostrils flared. He was not used to being answered with calm, nor with humor. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "And you bring a child into this hall? Do you think this a nest? Do you mean to shame us with your softness?" The boy shifted in his seat, embarrassed. Stein placed a hand gently on his shoulder, a motion that seemed paternal, almost absent-minded. He never broke eye contact with the king. Pages learn by watching. Consider it an educational program. Laughter rippled through the delegates again, though uneasily now. The king's face twisted with something uglier than disdain. He descended from his throne, strides shaking the floor, until he loomed directly above the human row. His tusks gleamed inches from the boy's pale face. "Education," he rumbled, voice like grinding stone. "Then let this be his first lesson." Before anyone registered what was happening, the king's clawed hand lashed out. With a crack that silenced the chamber, he struck the boy across the cheek. The child collapsed against Stein, a stunned cry escaping his lips, blood bright on his skin. The sound echoed, then died. For a heartbeat, the entire chamber seemed to breathe in unison. Alien delegates froze mid-gesture, feathers half-raised, antennae trembling. Some looked away in discomfort, others smirked, but none spoke. It was entertainment, after all. A child struck was no more significant to them than a servant beaten. Only the humans did not laugh. Stein adjusted his nephew upright, dabbing the boy's lip with a folded handkerchief from his coat pocket. His movements were slow, deliberate, unshaken. He whispered something soft, inaudible to the others, before placing the boy back against his chair. Then Stein rose. The ambassador's smile remained, faint and polite. He did not raise his voice. He did not curse or protest. He looked at the Galactic King as one might look at a misbehaving dog, pity softening the edge of his gaze. "Thank you, Your Majesty," he said, voice carrying in the stillness. "Truly, you've just revealed your true nature for all to see. We'll make note of it in the records." The king barked a laugh, mistaking this calm for cowardice. "Note it, little mammal. Scribble it in your books. Your child's tears are your only legacy." Stein tilted his head, as if considering the angle of light on the crystal spires above. Strange thing about notes. They become history. And history has a way of deciding who's remembered kindly. The chamber rustled with unease. Was this defiance? A joke? The king dismissed it with a wave, striding back to his throne, basking in his imagined dominance. Stein remained standing. He picked up his coffee mug, swirling what remained, inhaling the bitter aroma. His voice, when it came again, was softer, meant almost as an aside, but the acoustics carried it to every corner. "It's funny," he mused. "On Earth, we have a saying, you never touch a man's coffee, or his child. Do either, and you won't like what happens next." A few nearby delegates chuckled uncertainly, unsure if this was humor or warning. The king sat, unconcerned. Stein took a slow sip, eyes half-lidded. He set the mug down once more, aligning it precisely with the doodles on his pad. Then he sat, folding his hands, expression tranquil. To anyone else, he looked finished with the matter. But those who had the instinct to survive, the old reptilian matriarch, the silent feathered delegate, felt the shift. Something coiled in the room now, invisible but undeniable. The humans were quiet, too quiet. The session stumbled onward, but every word rang hollow. The child sat stiffly, refusing to cry, blood drying at his lip. Stein did not comfort him again. He simply rested one hand lightly on the boy's shoulder, steady as stone. Minutes passed. The debates resumed, though no one seemed to care about tariffs or territorial lines anymore. Delegates spoke, but their eyes flickered constantly toward the humans, measuring their stillness. Then a sound. A metallic click, subtle but unmistakable, reverberated through the sealed doors of the chamber. Another and another. The kind of sound made not by machines of law, but by locks shifting, by barriers sealing. The grand doors that had opened so easily this morning now shimmered with layered security fields. Several delegates rose in alarm. The king snarled. "What is this? Who dares tamper with my counsel?" Stein did not move. He only exhaled, long and patient, as if the timing of the sound was a confirmation rather than a surprise. He leaned toward his nephew, whispering again, this time loud enough for those nearest to catch. 5 minutes, he said calmly. That's how fast the world can change. The boy nodded, eyes wide, as if he understood something deeper. Delegates shouted, demanding answers, but Stein sat back, folding his hands atop the notepad filled with doodles. The coffee steamed faintly beside him. His smile returned, not warm now, but sharp at the edges, an echo of something predatory. The king rose again, fury blazing. He pointed a tusked finger toward the humans. "Explain yourselves, apes, or I will have your heads on pikes." Stein met his gaze evenly. His voice was soft, almost amused. "Your Majesty," he said, "I think you'll find the matter of heads is about to take on a very different meaning." The chamber fell into silence, every alien throat suddenly dry. And somewhere, behind the locked doors, the footsteps began. The footsteps outside the sealed chamber came in rhythm, not hurried, not clumsy, but measured, like a heartbeat carved into stone. At first faint, they grew louder, closer, multiplied, until they reverberated against the crystalline walls and made the delegates' voices falter. The king shouted for guards, but no one came. The guards were not late. They were gone. Stein stirred his coffee again, the tiny clink of porcelain somehow louder than the pounding in the corridor. He didn't look at the king or the terrified delegates. His gaze remained on the liquid's slow spiral, as though the swirl of steam revealed something only he understood. A feathered delegate whispered, "Those are human boots." No one replied. The sound stopped. For a moment, silence reigned so absolute that even the faint hum of the asteroid's life support systems seemed to vanish. Then, with a groan of ancient hinges, the great doors parted. They didn't open ceremoniously, nor with the grandeur of a royal entrance. They yielded like prey bones cracking under a predator's bite. Smoke rolled in, thick with the acrid sting of burning metal. Through it stepped the first figure, human, armored, the insignia of Earth's united forces gleaming faintly in the haze. Behind him came another, then another, until a dozen shapes emerged, rifles slung low, movements precise, disciplined. These were not soldiers stumbling into battle. They were surgeons arriving at an operating table. Aliens recoiled in horror, antennae twitching, feathers bristling, mandibles clicking in panic. Some delegates demanded explanations, their voices shrill with the desperation of creatures accustomed to dominance. Others clutched at their ornate staffs or data tablets, as if the trappings of authority could shield them. The king roared, "This is sacrilege. How dare you bring weapons into this chamber?" Stein finally looked up. His smile was faint, apologetic in tone, but not in meaning. "Terribly sorry, Your Majesty, but you struck a child in a council hall. According to Galactic law, Section 12, subsection 7, that constitutes grounds for immediate self-defense measures." The king sneered. "Lies. There is no such clause." Stein shrugged, rising slowly from his chair. "Funny thing about laws. They're written down by people with pens. And Earth brought a lot of pens." The boy sat straighter, his cheeks still raw, but his eyes bright with something like awe. The soldiers didn't even glance at him. They didn't need to. Their attention was locked on the king, every step synchronizing like the slow tightening of a noose. The reptilian matriarch, scales glistening with fierce sweat, hissed at Stein. "You planned this. You waited for him to strike." Stein offered a small bow, polite as ever. "We hoped he wouldn't. We prayed he wouldn't. But history suggested he would. And humanity has always been very good at betting on history." The soldiers fanned out with military precision, boots clicking against the chamber floor in a cadence that mocked the king's once unquestioned authority. They formed a semicircle, rifles angled low but ready, their eyes hidden behind visors that reflected the king's own fury back at him. One of the younger alien delegates, trembling with wide eyes, whispered, But they smile. They always smile. How could they hide this?" The matriarch hissed back, "Because predators with teeth this sharp always smile before they bite." The king drew his ceremonial blade, a massive thing carved from a meteor core, meant more for intimidation than utility. He raised it high, snarling with the confidence of one who had never known defeat. "You dare. I am the king of the Vair Dominion. My bloodline spans 1,000 conquests." Stein tilted his head, adjusting his tie with the absent grace of a man preparing for a dinner, not a war. "That's lovely," he said softly. "Earth's family tree includes grizzly bears, great white sharks, and wolves. We're sentimental about bloodlines, too." The soldiers advanced one synchronized step. The blade trembled in the king's hand, not from weakness, but from the sudden realization that his throne, his crown, his dominance meant nothing in the face of this relentless, quiet efficiency. One delegate squawked, "Stop this madness. Humanity will doom itself." Stein turned to the speaker, his voice calm, almost kind. "No, Ambassador. Humanity doesn't doom itself. Humanity dooms those who mistake kindness for weakness." The soldiers split into two groups. Half remained, rifle steady, ensuring every alien in the chamber stayed frozen. The other half advanced toward the throne. Their movements were soundless, surgical. Not one wasted gesture. The boy leaned forward, whispering with childlike clarity, "Uncle, are they going to—" Stein patted his shoulder gently. eyes never leaving the king. Yes, lad. They are. The king bellowed, slashing his blade in defiance. It cut through smoke, but found no flesh. A soldier sidestepped effortlessly. Another disarmed him with a motion so clean it looked rehearsed. The blade clattered across the marble, ringing like a funeral bell. The king stumbled back, chest heaving, tusks bared in desperation. You cannot do this. This is the council. Stein walked toward him now, each step echoing like a verdict. He didn't rush. He didn't threaten. He simply closed the distance, stopping when his polished shoes touched the fallen blade. Your Majesty, Stein said, voice carrying the weight of every quiet storm Earth had ever endured. The council is not walls or spires or titles. It is the sum of our choices. Today, you chose to strike a child, and Earth chooses to answer. For the first time in living memory, the king's roar faltered. His tusks trembled as his gaze darted between the unblinking rifles and Stein's calm smile. He opened his mouth to speak, but the soldiers seized him, pinning his massive form as easily as men pinning livestock. The hall erupted. Some delegates shrieked, demanding intervention. Others watched in fascinated horror, unable to look away. A few, very few, remained silent, as if they had known this day was inevitable. Stein raised his coffee mug in a mock toast. Counselors, let this be a lesson. Every predator eventually meets one sharper, hungrier, and infinitely more patient. One of the soldiers produced restraints, thick metal cuffs that shimmered with an energy field. They locked around the king's wrists, rendering him helpless, dragging his massive frame toward the center dais where his throne had loomed moments before. His crown tilted, his robe tore, his dignity shredded before the eyes of all. The boy whispered again, voice trembling with awe. They don't even look scared. Stein crouched slightly to meet his gaze, his voice a murmur meant only for the child, yet heavy enough for nearby ears to catch. Because, lad, fear is for those who react. Humans don't react. We prepare. Outside the chamber, distant rumbles shook the walls. Alien delegates flinched, whispering of fleets, of wars, of retaliation. Stein sipped his coffee with maddening serenity. Oh, that? Don't worry. Just cleaning up the rest of his guards. They were terribly rude at security. The king thrashed, tusks snapping in impotent fury. He spat curses, threats of vengeance, promises of retaliation from loyal subjects. Stein let him rant, listening as one might to a storm outside a sturdy cabin. Then, softly, almost kindly, Stein leaned close enough that the king could see the faint lines of laughter at the corners of his eyes. Majesty, here's the real tragedy. You thought the council was your stage. You thought striking a child made you feared. But you've only proven something humanity never says aloud. We don't start fights. We finish them. The king froze, realization dawning too late. The chamber's air grew heavier, as though the asteroid itself sensed what was about to occur. Soldiers dragged the king forward, his bulk scraping against the floor. The delegates began to murmur prayers, curses, desperate pleas for compromise. Stein turned to them, spreading his arms slightly as though unveiling a grand exhibit. Gentle beings, please. Observe. This is not chaos. This is order restored. The boy looked around at the trembling figures, his young face caught between horror and pride. Uncle, are they afraid of us now? Stein rested a steady hand on his shoulder, voice soft but unyielding. They should be. The soldiers forced the king to kneel before his throne, the symbol of power now mocking him. His tusks dripped with spittle, his eyes wild with disbelief. For the first time, he looked less like a monarch and more like prey cornered by hunters. Stein approached slowly, lifting the fallen blade from the marble floor. He weighed it in his hand, testing the balance. His movements carried no malice, only inevitability. He turned the blade once, letting the light catch on its core. Funny, he said, voice almost conversational. On Earth, we like to say the pen is mightier than the sword. But sometimes the sword has its moment too. The delegates shivered at the casual cruelty in his tone, though his smile remained polite. The boy clutched Stein's sleeve, whispering urgently, "What happens next?" Stein didn't answer him directly. Instead, he raised his voice, carrying it across the silent chamber. What happens next, counselors, is history. And history will remember that when a king struck a human child, humanity responded. He let the words hang in the air, heavier than any blade. Then he lowered his gaze to the king, his smile faint but merciless. "And now, your majesty, you'll learn what 5 minutes can really mean." The soldiers tightened their grip. The chamber held its breath, and the blade in Stein's hand gleamed like a sunrise about to break. The blade gleamed as Stein held it aloft, its meteor-forged edge catching the fractured light from the chamber spires. The room was silent except for the strained breaths of the Galactic King, who knelt shackled and trembling, a titan suddenly dwarfed by inevitability. The soldiers flanked him with steady rifles, their discipline a language louder than roars. Around them, the council shifted restlessly, hundreds of delegates fidgeting in fear, claws scraping marble, feathers rustling, tendrils quivering. Stein studied the blade, turning it in his hand with idle curiosity, as though appraising a curio in a market stall rather than a weapon of execution. He tested its weight, tapped the flat against his palm, and smiled faintly. "You know," he said softly, conversational, "humans once believed iron held memories, that the metal could remember the hands that wielded it. I wonder, will this blade remember you, your majesty?" The king snarled, his tusks dripping with foam. "You dare humiliate me here? My fleets will reduce your world to ash. My name will echo when your kind is dust beneath my claws." Stein tilted his head, voice calm, almost bored. "Names echo true, but some as songs and some as warnings." The boy, seated rigidly at the human delegation table, watched with wide eyes. His lip was still split, drying blood painting his cheek like war paint. Yet there was no fear now, only a trembling anticipation. He had never seen his uncle like this. The man who taught him chess, who told him bedtime stories, who teased him for drinking milk too fast, was now speaking with the voice of something larger than family, larger than Earth itself. The soldiers tightened their grip on the king. He thrashed, massive muscles straining, but their hold did not falter. Their movements were not the panicked clutching of men against a beast. They were the calm mastery of hunters restraining prey they had captured 1,000 times before. A delegate from the Eastern Spiral, his many eyes wide, croaked out, "This is barbarism. Humanity cannot butcher a monarch before the council." Stein glanced toward him, his smile unwavering. Barbarism? On Earth, barbarism was razing cities, enslaving peoples, burning books. This, he gestured to the soldiers, to the kneeling king, this is restraint. Quick, precise, surgical. If you want barbarism, I could give you a history lecture. But I doubt you'd sleep after. Nervous laughter rippled across one corner of the chamber. It wasn't humor. It was survival instinct, a desperate attempt to ease the unbearable tension. But Stein's eyes cut toward the sound, and it died instantly, smothered under the weight of his composure. He stepped closer to the king, lowering the blade until its edge touched the monarch's tusk. The faintest scrape of metal against enamel rang in the silence. The king growled, but the sound cracked at the edges, stripped of its usual authority. "Do you feel it?" Stein whispered. "The way the room holds its breath? That's power. Not crowns, not thrones, not fleets. Power is when silence obeys you." The boy whispered to himself, voice trembling but audible in the hush. "He's not afraid of him at all." The reptilian matriarch hissed softly, her voice barely above a breath. "No, child. He's afraid of nothing." The king roared again, this time desperate. "You cannot kill me. To do so is to kill order itself." Stein leaned close, his words brushing the monarch's ear like a secret. "Order? Order isn't a crown, Majesty. Order is a predator reminding the pack who leads the hunt." He raised the blade high. The chamber erupted, delegates shrieking, feathers bursting, claws slamming onto tables. A chorus of panic rose, demanding, begging, threatening. The boy pressed his fists against his knees, every nerve alight. He whispered again, louder this time, "Do it." Stein did not strike. Not yet. He lowered the blade slowly, deliberately, letting the anticipation gnaw at every soul present. He turned to the council, speaking clearly, each syllable slicing sharper than the steel. Ladies, gentlemen, esteemed, whatever it is you call yourselves, this is not about vengeance. This is not about bloodlust. This is a lesson. A line was crossed today. A human child was struck, here, in the chamber meant to safeguard every voice, no matter how small. And when lines are crossed, he tapped the blade's edge against the marble dais with a ringing note. We answer. The chamber quaked with murmurs. Some alien faces were pale with fear, others hardened in fury. Yet none moved. Not one dared interfere. The king spat, saliva hissing on the floor. You think yourself judge, jury, executioner? You are nothing. Your world is nothing. Stein studied him, then looked back at the boy. Their eyes met, uncle and nephew, diplomat and child, predator and witness. Stein gave the faintest nod, as if granting silent permission. The boy straightened in his chair, his voice carrying farther than he realized. He hit me. The words cut sharper than the blade itself. The chamber froze, every ear tuned to the simplicity of a child's truth. The boy's cheek bore the evidence, the red mark already darkening. The crime needed no further argument. Stein turned back to the king, voice low but carrying. And for that, history closes its book on you. The blade flashed. It was not a barbaric swing, not a drawn-out spectacle. It was a clean, precise motion, practiced and perfect. The kind of strike that spoke not of rage, but of discipline. The king's roar ended in a wet gurgle as his head separated from his body, crown tumbling with a hollow clatter across the marble. The chamber erupted, not with applause, not with chaos, but with the deafening silence of disbelief. Hundreds of delegates stared at the sight, the once untouchable king reduced to meat and bone, lifeless, head rolling to rest at Stein's feet. The soldiers released the body, letting it slump in graceless collapse. Blood pooled dark and alien across the white floor. Stein crouched, picked up the severed head by its crown, and lifted it for all to see. His smile never wavered, but his eyes gleamed with a cold fire. Behold, he said, voice ringing through the chamber. Not vengeance, not murder, justice. 1,000 eyes stared, unblinking. Some shimmered with tears, some with terror, some with a flicker of dangerous admiration. Stein carried the head to the central hook that jutted above the chamber dais, meant for banners during ceremonies. He hung it there with steady hands, letting it dangle, swaying slightly in the air. The king's tusks gleamed, his lifeless eyes staring eternally down upon the chamber he once dominated. The boy exhaled, long and shaky, his gaze fixed on the head, but instead of fear, something else took root, understanding. A delegate shouted, voice cracking with outrage. This is war. Humanity has doomed itself. Stein returned to his table, calmly sipping his coffee. No, humanity just declared it has limits. War is what happens when we forget that. The matriarch leaned forward, her scaled face pale, but her eyes blazing. You think this makes you rulers? It makes you butchers. Stein smiled faintly. Funny thing about butchers. They feed civilizations. The chamber shifted uneasily, whispers swelling like a storm. Stein ignored them. He focused on his nephew, gently straightening the boy's collar. Remember this, lad. We don't start fights. But when they strike first, he glanced up at the dangling head. We end them. The boy swallowed hard, nodding. I understand. For the first time in hours, Stein let silence stretch comfortably. He doodled again on his notepad, nothing more than circles, arrows, a chess knight sketched in pencil. Around him, the council could not look away from the head that swayed above them, dripping, a reminder that Earth's patience had limits. Then, softly, almost tenderly, Stein spoke into the quiet. Now, shall we continue with today's agenda? The chamber erupted in argument, some shouting condemnation, others demanding protection, still others whispering allegiance. But all the noise was framed by the grotesque pendulum of the king's head. The boy tugged Stein's sleeve, voice hushed. Uncle, what happens next? Stein looked down at him, eyes glinting with both pride and sorrow. Next, lad, the galaxy decides whether it wants to learn or to burn. The boy stared at the chamber, at the fear, at the trembling. And if they choose wrong? Stein's smile returned, polite and deadly. Then we'll teach them. The soldiers stood unmoving, rifle steady, faces unreadable behind their visors. The council fidgeted, whispered, panicked. The air was thick with dread, with the awareness that nothing in their universe was as it had been 5 minutes ago. The head dripped. The boy stared. The galaxy held its breath. And outside the chamber walls, the faint rumble of fleets repositioning echoed like distant thunder, waiting for a storm to break. The chamber had become a mausoleum, every delegate a silent mourner beneath the grisly pendulum of the king's severed head. The blood still dripped in lazy trails, pattering softly against the marble, each drop a metronome to the collective dread. No one dared look too long, yet no one could turn away. The air stank of iron and inevitability. Stein sipped the last of his coffee, the mug tilting back with practiced ease. He set it down with a soft clink that sounded louder than the shouts of 1,000 armies. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands, his expression as placid as a man watching morning fog burn off a lake. Only the faint curve of his lips betrayed amusement at the chaos quietly fermenting around him. The boy sat rigid beside him, eyes wide, face pale but resolute. His cheek still bore the red imprint of the strike that had started it all, a mark that seemed now less a wound than a brand, binding him to the lesson unraveling before the galaxy. He looked to his uncle with a child's desperate question etched into his eyes. Was this justice or vengeance? Stein answered with silence, letting the boy find meaning in the blood-stained marble. Delegates began to stir at last. The matriarchist, scales rattling. This cannot stand. You have broken every law, every accord. Humanity has no place among us. Stein turned his gaze to her, slow, deliberate. His smile never faded. On the contrary, humanity has defined its place today. You see, Ambassador, laws are ink. Power is blood. And when ink fails, blood rewrites the story. Her tongue flicked nervously, words shriveling in her throat. Around her, others muttered, some furious, some trembling. A feathered envoy screeched, wings flaring wide. You've shattered the sanctity of this chamber. If kings can fall here, none of us are safe. Stein inclined his head slightly, as if agreeing. Precisely. None of you are safe. Not if you cross the line. That's the point. The soldiers remained statues at the chamber's edge, rifles steady, eyes hidden. Their presence was a reminder that humanity's restraint had boundaries, and those boundaries had already been tested and found implacable. The boy finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. Uncle, they're all afraid. Stein placed a hand gently on his shoulder, the gesture casual, grounding. Good. Fear is honest. Fear tells the truth better than speeches. The murmurs swelled again, 100 tongues arguing, condemning, pleading. Stein let them run, like children throwing stones at a river. When the noise crested, he rose, smoothing the lapels of his coat as though preparing for an ordinary presentation. He stepped into the chamber's center, the light from the spires breaking across him, throwing long shadows over the blood pooling at his shoes. He looked around, meeting eyes one by one, letting silence smother the last protests. His voice, when it came, was calm, melodic, not raised yet carrying to every corner. You look at us and see contradictions. Mammals with soft skin, bones fragile beside your carapaces and scales. We smile. We laugh too easily. We bring children where you bring warriors. And so you decided we were weak. He gestured lightly toward the dangling head, his hand sweeping with a casual elegance that made the gesture all the more horrifying. But weakness is not the same as patience, and smiles are not the same as surrender. A delegate with ink-black eyes rasped, "You hide teeth behind those smiles." Stein chuckled softly. "We always have. Did you think evolution made us gentle because we build cities? The wolf doesn't lose its fangs when it learns to sleep by the fire. It simply chooses when to bare them. He began pacing slowly, his shoes tapping lightly against marble. Every step was measured, deliberate, the cadence of a teacher emphasizing points. The soldiers tracked him, not protectively, but as extensions of his movement, shadows orbiting a sun. On Earth, we learned long ago, strike our children, and you strike the future. Strike the future, and we respond with everything. Our histories are full of wars begun by arrogance, empires collapsing because they underestimated how far we'll go once the line is crossed. We do not claim to be noble. We do not claim to be merciful. We only claim to be human. And that, my esteemed counsel, is far more dangerous. The boy's gaze never left him, eyes shining with something caught between pride and terror. Stein, words were not only for the galaxy. They were for him, too, for the next generation who would inherit the weight of humanity's reputation. The matriarch hissed again, her voice sharp but quivering. You think yourselves predators above all? Every species here has claws. Every world has fangs. Stein stopped pacing, turned, and fixed her with a look that melted the rest of her words. Yes, but we're the only species that studies the hunt, writes it down, teaches it to children, and then invents new ways to do it better. The chamber rippled with unease. Whispers cascaded through the crowd. Some delegates nodded grimly, as if acknowledging a truth they had suspected. Others recoiled in denial. Stein spread his hands, palms open, his voice softening into something almost tender. We don't want war. We want peace. We like peace. We like family dinners, music, warm fires, children's laughter. But understand this, those are the things we'll scorch galaxies to protect. That is why we prepare. That is why we smile even when threatened. Because when the day comes that someone mistakes our patience for weakness. He glanced up again at the swaying head, letting the image finish the sentence. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. No one dared interrupt. Finally, the feathered envoy whispered hoarsely, "What do you want?" Stein exhaled, as though relieved someone had finally asked the right question. He walked back toward his table, collected his notepad, and tapped the doodle chess knight. He held it up briefly, then tucked it away. What do we want? Balance, respect, the assurance that no hand will ever strike one of ours again. The boy looked at him, brow furrowed. And if they do? Stein gave him the faintest smile. Then history repeats itself. One of the soldiers stepped forward, pulling from his belt a compact device. With a flick, it projected a holographic map above the dais. Red points spread across it, fleets, installations, worlds. All marked, all already compromised. Delegates gasped as they recognized their own defenses highlighted in crimson. Stein let the silence deepen before speaking again. We didn't come unprepared. For months, years perhaps, you believed we were naive, slow, too busy laughing at our own jokes to understand your politics. But every smile was a distraction. Every handshake, every cup of coffee, every polite nod in these chambers bought us time. Time to map you. Time to learn where your strength lies. And where to cut. The hologram flickered, focusing on the Dominion's territories, every fortress glowing like a candle ready to be snuffed. Gasps became screams. Some delegates bolted upright, demanding answers, demanding guarantees. Stein lifted a hand, silencing them again. His voice was smooth, almost kind. No need to panic. These are not targets. Not yet. Think of them as reminders. Humanity is patient, but not infinitely so. The boy whispered, awed. You planned this the whole time. Stein crouched beside him, voice soft, for him alone. Planning is survival, lad. Never forget that. He stood again, addressing the hall with finality. So here is the lesson, written in blood and silence. Never mistake civility for weakness. Never mistake patience for surrender. Humanity smiles because we'd rather not bare our teeth. But if you force us, his eyes swept the chamber, pinning each delegate in place. You'll remember why Earth's predators still rule their world. The soldiers deactivated the hologram. The chamber pulsed with whispers, a storm of fear and calculation. Alliances were already shifting, old rivalries dissolving in the shadow of Earth's revelation. The boy tugged Stein's sleeve again, voice hushed. "Uncle, did we just win?" Stein looked down at him, then at the head swaying above them, the tusks gleaming in silent testimony. His smile was faint, bittersweet. "No, lad. We didn't win. We taught. And if the lesson holds, maybe no one has to lose." The chamber doors rumbled as they unlocked at last, the smoke clearing from the corridors. The session had ended, though nothing would ever be the same. Stein gathered a satchel, tucked the notepad inside, and finished the last cold sip of coffee at the bottom of his mug. As he turned to leave, he paused, glancing once more at the head that dripped steadily from its perch. He let the silence hang a moment longer, then spoke in a voice quiet but sharp enough to cut through eternity. Class dismissed. The soldiers moved, the boy rose, the council trembled. And outside the asteroid, fleets repositioned, waiting for the galaxy's next move.